First of all, I wanted to welcome all of you that aren't from the Soo to Sault Ste. Marie. This is the kind of winter we've been having. Not sure it's ever going to end, but lots of snow, lots of gray, so welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about Lake Sturgeon first, and then Cisco's a little bit later. I'd like to thank the Lake Superior Committee for their interest in these fishes. I have lots of data in this talk from a number of different folks and different agencies, so I just wanted to thank them ahead of time. I won't be able to do that at the end. I'm going to begin by just showing this slide, which demonstrates where we believe lake sturgeon were historically. We think we had 19 historic spawning populations. 10 of them, represented by the green circles, remain extant. We know this because we've done spawning surveys in these rivers and documented spawning and larval production. We have 7 populations that are considered extirpated. Those are the red squares. And then on the U.S. side, on western waters there, you can see these 2 purple triangles. Those are 2 populations which have been reintroduced by stocking, and I'll be focusing on one of those quite significantly during the talk in the St. Louis River estuary. So that's kind of what the framework is for what I'll be talking about today. The Lake Superior Committee has approved 2 State of the Lake dashboard indicators for lake sturgeon. One is an adult abundance indicator and the other is a juvenile abundance indicator. The adult abundance indicator is 400 adults that spawn annually in a given tributary, or 1,500 adults in total. And the juvenile abundance number is based on our juvenile index survey, which I'll also be talking about later. It's a half fish age 4 to 8 in our standardized juvenile index net. And I'll be going over some data for what we have for both of those during the talk. I'm going to jump right into the adult abundance. Out of our 19 historic rivers, we only think that we are meeting our adult target in 2 of those rivers, the Bad River in Wisconsin, and then the Sturgeon River waterway that cut through the Keweenaw Peninsula. We are seeing increasing numbers of adults in the St. Louis River and the Ontonagon River, which are 2 rivers which we are stocking or were historically stocking. And then the other extant populations we think are pretty flat. I will say for all of these data that they're based on mark recapture data, which are historically very challenging to do. So in most of these rivers, we only have a single estimate, if that. Some of them are 25 or 30 years old. So it's really hard to know whether we're seeing any change in these populations, but certainly anecdotally, we're not hearing stories of more sturgeon in many of these rivers or less sturgeon. So we're kind of having to go with that we think that things are generally not changing for the vast majority of our rivers. We do have some adult data, specific adult data from a few locations. I'm going to start on the St. Louis River. So the St. Louis is in the far western part of the lake. It flows in through the cities of Duluth and Superior and has a large estuary out in the front of the river. As I mentioned earlier, this is a conservation stocking success story. The system was initially stocked in 1983 using a strain of fish from the Wolf River in Lake Michigan. And that strain was used through '98, at which point we started to use fish from the Sturgeon River in Superior. Stocking ceased in the year 2000. And what you're seeing here in this figure is the number of adults that were captured in the St. Louis River over time, starting in 2006 on the left and ending in 2024 on the right. The different colors indicate different ways of actually catching the sturgeon. So this isn't a standardized survey by any means, but the red bars are fish that were caught with electrofishing. The black are fish that were caught while on the spawning area while dip netting. So those are the 2 primary ways of accessing these fish. And what I wanted to show here is that since 2018 or so, we've averaged around 300 adults being sampled in this system annually. So going from nothing through conservation stocking to around 300 a year, I think is tremendous. These fish we know are stocked, so there have been genetic surveys done in 2016 to 18 showed 80% of these fish were from the Wolf River stock. There's been work on the larval fish. I should say the first larval production or natural reproduction in this system occurred in 2011, at least we think. And they've had small numbers sampled annually, or at least most years since then, but all those fish have linked back so far to the Wolf River as well. So generally a good news story, but came about because of conservation stocking efforts. We have a longer-term adult data set from Chequamegon Bay. We think that these fish primarily sample adults from the Bad River, which, as if you remember, is one of the rivers where we're meeting our adult targets. In this data set, you can see that there was kind of a period of stability from the earliest part of the data set in the late 1980s through early 2000s, and then we had this pretty rapid increase in number of adults through that time frame from 2005 to early 2010s. And even though the blue line wavers around a bit, really it's been quite consistent at that new level since that time. So we've reached a higher level of abundance relatively quickly in this population. And this survey, should have mentioned, is run by the Wisconsin DNR, and it has 8, 10, 12, and 14-inch mesh. So this is strictly sampling adult fish in the bay. We have a shorter data series from Gooley Bay and the eastern part of the lake, so here in the broader Whitefish Bay area. These are fish that are captured in the juvenile lake sturgeon index nets, but those nets do have two mesh sizes, 8 and 10-inch mesh, that pick up adults. So these are fish that are greater than 1 meter long. Again, relatively flat. Not a lot of change here. We had that one data point in 2014 that was higher, but had much lower effort that year than most of our other years. So that's why you have more variance there as well. But I do want to note that the scale is completely different. So here in Chequamegon Bay, we're seeing on average probably 70 fish per gillnet kilometer. Gooley Bay, we're less than 5. So that's the difference between a population that we think is doing really well versus one that we think is doing pretty well, but nowhere near the number of adults in Gooley Bay as we have in Chequamegon Bay. When we look at juvenile abundance, a little bit of a better story. We have 7 rivers from our latest lake-wide juvenile index assessment in 2021 that were above our target, and you can see those listed with the green check mark. We do have a number of extant rivers that were below that target, including some surprising ones, which I'm going to focus on just for a second. So there you can see the Sturgeon River, which I mentioned was one of our populations that we thought was fully restored. The St. Louis River, which I already just talked about a bit. The Kaministiquia River is another one on that list, and all 3 of those systems don't behave like many of the other rivers that we have in Lake Superior. Instead of just the river dumping right out into the lake, they all have either extremely large estuaries like you would in the St. Louis River. The Sturgeon River waterway is a series of interconnected lakes that cut through the Keweenaw Peninsula. The Kaministiquia River has quite a large estuarine area as well. The river splits into 3 large sections that are basically lake influenced as you approach Thunder Bay Harbor. So those rivers, it seems that maybe our lake sturgeon index netting that we're using to measure juvenile abundance might not be doing as good of a job with that survey as maybe we would like to think. And as we move forward next year, hopefully with another survey, we might need to think about ways to maybe change things up in those systems. We do have some juvenile data, again some longer term data sets and some shorter term ones. Here's one off the mouth of the Bad River. This is strictly fishing 4.5-inch gill nets, so picking up those juvenile age fish that we target in our regular juvenile nets, which are mostly made up of 4.5-inch mesh as well. The dashed red line at the bottom is what our juvenile target would be, translated over just 4.5-inch mesh. So you can see here in the Bad River, maybe a slight decline over time, but still very healthy numbers of juveniles, averaging of around 30 fish per gill net kilometer. If we look again in Gooley Bay, these are the juveniles that come out of those same nets that I presented data from the adults before. Much higher numbers than we had for adults. Again, well above the juvenile target, which is the dashed red line at the bottom, and again of around 30 to 40 fish per gill net kilometer. So much healthier population of juveniles than adults, at least we see in Gooley Bay. There are other surveys that pick up lake sturgeon around the lake. I just wanted to show a couple. This is Wisconsin data. So these are the spring assessment, which targets lake trout using 4.5-inch gill nets, and then a summer assessment, which uses broader meshes that targets the whole fishery. But these nets do catch sturgeon. They do encounter sturgeon, so I'm just going to quickly show that during those high stocking years in the St. Louis River, those juvenile sturgeon were cruising along the south shore as well. So here the top data are from the spring survey, the bottom data are from the summer survey. And you can kind of see these peaks around the year 2000 or slightly earlier for the spring data because it's fishing smaller meshes targeting, like I said, those age 4 to 8 fish. And then a little bit longer, those fish appeared in the summer survey because you're keeping some adults in those larger meshes that are fished during the summer survey. But really what you're seeing here is this stocking signal from the St. Louis River. But it does certainly show up in both the spring and summer survey. I have another data set just from the St. Louis River estuary that shows exactly the same thing. You see these peak catches occurring in the late 90s and early 2000s and then dropping off rather rapidly as those fish were stopped being stocked in the year 2000. And one thing you can see here that I did want to point out is that even though we're seeing all these adults in the St. Louis River, we're not seeing many juveniles reappearing. So we're not sure just how successful those individuals are at spawning yet in the St. Louis River because it's not really translating into juveniles yet. If we would be seeing those fish in this survey certainly by now if large numbers were surviving to age 4 or 5. I want to briefly talk about the index survey. I mentioned it a few times, but this is our only lake-wide standardized survey. So every 5 years, in association with the CS year, all the agencies have so far agreed to put in effort and sample sturgeon around Lake Superior. We have a few broad goals. One of them is to be able to measure the status of juvenile fish the same way everywhere. But we hope over time that we can get at our second objective here, which is looking at individual tributaries and determining things like recruitment, year class strength, and population trends in those individual tributaries. And I will be spending a little bit of time on the third objective here as well. We have some very interesting genetic data from these fish. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been contracting with West Virginia University and Amy Welsh's lab to look for origin of our fish that we pick up in this juvenile survey. And as you'll see, we see some really interesting results. Just wanted to remind you what the data kind of looks like from this. It's been pretty consistent across years. We have some populations. I'm just going to focus on the east here, part of the lake. The Goulet River, like I showed, lots of juveniles well above the target, which is this dashed line. We have a river like the Tequamanon River, which is one of our extirpated rivers, where I think we've picked 1 sturgeon in the 3 years that we've run this survey in 2016, 2021. 2011, 2016, and 2021. And then we have more rivers, or like the Batchewana River, where last year it was just above target, but other years it's just below target. So, and you can look across your favorite river here across anywhere, and you'll see kind of similar trends and similar patterns. So, we're going to having a call. All the agencies are having a call on Monday to talk about the potential for reprising this survey in 2026. I'm going to end with a couple of fun slides. I have a genetic slide and then I have a telemetry slide. So this is all of the fish that were captured in the 2021 juvenile index surveys, not only including juveniles but also including adults. It's a little bit busy, I know. It's a lot of colors. So the colors represent individual spawning tributaries. Don't know, you probably can't quite read them, but they're labeled up here. Most of them are from Lake Superior, but there are a couple from Lake Huron because those fish show up in the eastern part of the lake with some regularity. What I wanted to show you here was there's a couple of really interesting patterns. First of all, you can see that our dominant populations are dominant within large stretches of the lake. So I'm just going to start in the east. The purple color is adults from the Goulet River, or fish that are genotyped back to the Goulet River. You can see that eastern Lake Superior, Whitefish Bay is dominated by that purple color. In the northeast part of the lake, we have that teal color. Those are fish coming out of the Pick River, and they not only dominate off the mouth of the Pick, but also are the main fish that we're finding off of the Mishpicotton River. On the south shore, it gets interesting and a little bit complicated, but that dark red color is the Sturgeon River waterway. Again, one of our healthiest populations. It is also the current source of stocking in the Ontonagon River and was the source of stocking in the later years of the St. Louis River. So you can see that it is found along the south shore. That yellow color is the Wolf River population, so that Lake Michigan strain that was stocked. You can see that it has traveled along the south shore and is even found in the north, all the way up into the northeast part of the lake in small numbers, but those fish got around. And I guess lastly I wanted to show the gray are fish that we didn't know where they came from, so we still have a lot of those, particularly in the eastern part of the lake, which means we're either missing source populations or there's something happening that we can't quite distinguish where those fish are from. And I did want to point out the Bad River in particular here. So that's Bad River's here, one of our best populations, but it's the orange color, so you can see it in a few spots on the south shore. But there's some concern now that all the stocking that's occurring in the Ontonagon and the earlier stocking in the St. Louis, those fish might be kind of swamping the Bad River a little bit. So it's something we need to be careful of, I think, moving forward, is how we look at conservation stocking and how we move these individuals around. We heard the same message with the brook trout talks earlier today. My last data slide is really crazy busy, and I'll try to get through this quick, but I just wanted to show that we have at least half a dozen lake sturgeon telemetry projects going on around the lake, and most of those started about 10 years ago. The tags have a 10-year life, and we're just starting to get some really neat data back. So I'm just going to walk through this slide really quickly, but try to get you excited about it, because we were when we saw it. This is data that was led by Daryl Hondorp. He had a postdoc named Sky Facette at Michigan State University, and he asked people from around the Great Lakes that had long-term lake sturgeon data sets for their data, because he wanted to look for interesting behaviors, migration behaviors in lake sturgeon. They did this work in the St. Clair a number of years ago, but they wanted to broaden it to see if we can maybe even see different behaviors if you looked at different populations. So 3 of the Superior Lake Sturgeon telemetry data sets were used in this work. We have black sturgeon, which we heard about today, the Black Sturgeon River data. We have St. Louis River data, and then we have Eastern Lake Superior, so Whitefish Bay data. And the paper found 7 lake sturgeon migratory behaviors. Those are here on the right-hand side. The 5 highlighted in green were observed in our Lake Superior populations. And the way this works is the intermittent spring river one, for example, is this migratory pattern that we usually see in lake sturgeon. These are fish that spawn every 3rd or 4th year, run up the same tributary, and then live most of their lives back in the lake. So we had fish from all 3 of our superior populations that exhibited this. We have fish that move annually into spring rivers. So this was a fish from the Black Sturgeon River, probably a male, but every year he runs up the black sturgeon to spawn. This isn't a behavior that we expected to see in lake sturgeon. We thought even males were intermittent, but not necessarily. This intermittent spring river is our fish that move in, the intermittent two-step are fish that move into rivers in the fall, overwinter in the river, and then spawn in the spring before moving back out in the lake. So we see that in the St. Louis and the black sturgeon, places that have large estuaries that can hold fish in the winter. We have fish that are river resident, so they never leave the river. Again, the same 2, Black Sturgeon and St. Louis River. And then there are fish that spawn in one river and then spend the summer in a different river. And we see that behavior in Lake Superior as well. And so it has to do with habitat complexity. The more habitats that the fish have available to them, the more of these behaviors we're going to see in the population. So I just wanted to show that up quickly. This paper is under review. I'm sure it'll be out soon, but just wanted to show you the kind of fun things we can do with the telemetry data that we're collecting. I realize I'm out of time, so I'm going to let you read the summary slide and then maybe have a minute for questions if there are any. Thank you.